Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wrote in June 2000, and I quote, "Serious flaws exist in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms." He doesn't like the fact that the duty of the courts is to uphold the Charter. In the blatant attempt to get around a Charter that he doesn't like, the Prime Minister is stacking advisory committees to fill the bench with people who share his ideology. When will the Prime Minister stop meddling with the courts and imposing his right-wing agenda?
Much to the contrary, Mr. Speaker.
The rights of the courts to rule under the Charter of Rights, although I think there could be changes. We do believe on this side that property rights should be included in the Charter, Mr. Speaker. But this, at the same time, Mr. Speaker, this party is committed to ensuring that we appoint men and women of the highest quality to the courts of our land to enforce and to apply our laws, and that's what we did when we named Justice Rothstein to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Canada's Chief Justice urged the government not to change the selection process. She said, "We believe it is necessary to protect the interest of all Canadians in an independent advisory process for judicial appointments." Well, Mr. Speaker, fairness and independence are being sacrificed in the name of a right-wing political agenda. When will the Prime Minister restore the balance and independence of the selection committee?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, these committees are independent. The government doesn't even name all of the members. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I could look at if the leader of the Liberal Party wants to know why we should look at changing the process, just consider the fact that in 2002, his government appointed the wife of the campaign manager, national campaign manager of the Liberal Party, to be Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Ontario.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has a long history of trying to undermine the credibility of the Charter of Rights and the independence of the Canadian judiciary. Right. But, Mr. Speaker, rights are rights are rights. And what this government wants to do with judicial appointments is just dead wrong. When will the Prime Minister stop trying to undermine the independence of the judiciary? When will he stop trying to impose his conservative ideology on the Canadian court system?
Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, nothing could be farther from the truth, Mr. Speaker. The individuals that have been appointed and will be appointed will be of the highest caliber, and there is certainly no attempt by this government to do anything other than that. I have to say to the honourable member, we don't need any lessons from the Liberal Party on rights. It's this party that has consistently, throughout its history, stood up for the rights of individuals, Canadians, and we'll continue to do so.
This government spends all of its time running an election campaign and looking for ways to push its ideological agenda. Why does this government have a plan to change the way judges are appointed, but no plan to help Canadians succeed?
On the Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, what's clear, Mr. Speaker, is that the honourable member certainly has a plan to audition for a new role. I will say, Mr. Speaker, that the former Minister of Justice, Mr. Speaker, announced important changes last year that would ensure that when we select judges, that the police have input into the selection of judges in this country. We want to make sure we're bringing forward laws to make sure that we crack down on crime, that we make our streets and communities safer. We want to make sure our selection of judges is in correspondence with those objectives.
Mr. Speaker, Peter Russell, a noted expert on judicial selection, has said the Conservatives have lowered the qualification standards for judges. He said, and I quote, "They have changed the role of the advisory committee, so now they do not select the most highly qualified. There's really no merit selection going on, and that is a dreadful change," unquote. How can Canadians have faith in the judicial system that it will be fair and impartial when our selection process is now about politics and no longer about the interests of justice?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, this government has made a number of appointments to the bench of people of very high quality. In fact, Mr. Speaker, these people were all recommended by a selection process put in place by the previous government. Mr. Speaker, that's very different, Mr. Speaker, to select people based on diverse input and based on merit, rather than the previous system where Benoit Corbet told CBC Radio that for all intents and purposes, judgeships were available to those who gave the most money to the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has finally admitted that he's stacking the judicial system to suit his right-wing ideology. Yesterday, he told this House that he wanted to make sure that the selection of judges adheres to his right-wing agenda. How can Canadians trust this Prime Minister to respect their rights and values when he admits that he intends to manipulate the judge selection process?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government has made it very clear to Canadians that we want to see a stronger criminal justice system that strengthens and that supports and that protects our children, our streets, and our communities. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Justice announced that when we set up independent committees for advice on judicial appointments, that would include, for instance, perspective of the police, of a law enforcement perspective. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the leader of the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party don't like the police, don't like a law enforcement perspective. But, Mr. Speaker, this is important that we move in this direction, get away from the soft on crime policy.
Well, the Prime Minister is busy rigging the courts. Thousands of jobs are being lost in our auto and manufacturing sectors. His government is doing absolutely nothing to help Canadian workers. If the Prime Minister doesn't share his industry minister's appalling indifference and laissez-faire, where's his plan to help our auto workers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, now the leader of the Liberal Party, having raised the subject of crime, would like to change the subject. And I'm not surprised he would like to change the subject, Mr. Speaker, because he isn't just soft on crime. For the first time in history, we have a leader of the opposition who's soft on terrorism. He's refusing to take the advice of Bob Rae, of John Manley, of Anne McClellan, and to back the anti-terrorism provisions that his own government put in place.
Mr. Speaker, instead of posturing on the subject of crime, this side of the House would like to be smart on crime. This government has displayed astonishing arrogance towards the institutions of our country. Its attempt to change the rules for appointing judges demonstrates a lack of respect for the judiciary. And as for Parliament, last night the Minister of the Environment called a bill passed by this House a joke. The court system shouldn't be manipulated, and no bill passed in the House of Commons is ever a joke. When will this arrogance stop? When will this Prime Minister begin to show respect for the institutions?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is no higher duty than the protection of our citizens from dangerous crime and terrorism. The leader of the Liberal Party, we all know that both of our parties voted in favour of these anti-terror measures. Bob Rae, a candidate for the leadership, as we all know, has said that the opposition of the Liberal leader could well impact investigations into the Air India incident. I know that other prominent Liberals have spoken out in favour of this, Anne McClellan, John Manley, the member for Mount Royal, the member for Etobicoke North, yet the leader of the Liberal Party is being led by extremist elements in his own caucus. I'd suggest, Mr. Speaker, that he get behind his own...